Welcome back to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, we're going super Christianity. There's going to be a couple in the row. Scotty's set up here for me. We have Pastor Eric Jackson, the feral Christian. Ooh, I got to unpack that one. Feral Christian? Should be fun. But before we go, most of you podcast listeners out there, you all want to start a podcast. You know you do. Come on, man. You're listening to this, you're thinking, man, I'm a subject matter expert on the world of X, Y, or Z. Start a podcast. Why not? Go to getagripstudios.com. Fully virtual. Best place in the world to do a podcast. Get the expert back there who produces all my stuff to do it for you. That's Scott at getagripstudios.com. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Life podcast, Pastor Eric Jackson.
Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited. And before you said that I am the feral Christian, I'll even say I'm trying to be. That's the goal. That's what I'm shooting for. And hopefully there's a lot more people than just me shooting for that. Because that is kind of what my whole, passion project is right now, is hopefully helping people walk through a little bit of a different definition of what it means to actually be a Christian.
And so when I, last night I listened to your podcast, which I want to talk a little bit about, but I went and Googled the definition of the word feral. And so I want to make sure that I understand what you mean when you say feral, because there are feral species. A feral dog is not something that you want in your neighborhood. What is it that you mean when you say feral?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you asked, because the main reason that I use this word is an issue that I keep running into as a pastor is that there's certain words we want to use. There's certain words that we're used to using, but we all define them slightly differently. So if I were to, even the word Christian, when I say to you, hey, I'm a Christian, each person that I say that to, that means something completely different to them. And so I'm running into these issues where I want to explain my heart, because that's where I think the church can do a lot better job, is just putting our hearts out there of where we're at and what we're feeling and what we're thinking. It's difficult because even as I try to use basic words, I don't know how they're defining them. So when I wanted to write this book and talk about a different way of defining yourself and a different way of looking at yourself as a Christian, I knew I needed to come up with a word that wasn't being used so that I could define it for people, because that is so powerful to be able to say, I get to actually define what I'm talking about. And you're not going to hear a word and automatically think you know what I mean. So I looked at it, and all I wanted was this idea of actually acting in a way that makes sense for a Christian to act in a way that's natural for a Christian to act, from the beginning, how it's been laid out for us, what we should be doing, how we should be thinking. I wanted a word that just encompassed that, something that is just appropriate. And the word feral, I know when you first hear it, it doesn't sound like that's what that would mean at all. But as I was looking at definitions and things like that, that is what I kept coming back to, is, like you said, a feral animal, you're not going to want in your neighborhood. But if you're being honest, a feral animal is acting in a way that's basically natural for their species to act. It's an animal that is not domesticated. And in the book, that's a big topic that I talk about, is how we as Christians have become domesticated. We've become a weird half version of what we were really meant to be. And so I knew I wanted to call people out of domestication, and the word feral just seemed like a perfect fit for me.
Have you ever heard of the book by C.S. Lewis called Men Without Chests?
I have heard of it, and I believe that I read it a while back, but I don't think I could pick out like a specific thing that he said. But I love C.S. Lewis, and I do read a lot of his books.
The interesting part to me about that book when I read it, and just some other authors from that, mid-century time of the 20th century, that kind of era, there was a lot of talk about sort of an erosion, not a decay, but an erosion of the strength of character that was inherent in Christians and allowed the winning, say, of the Second World War and the First World War, some things like this talk of a erosion of that type of archetype of who a man should be. And they were speaking with men. So when you're saying a feral Christian, I think you're largely being inclusive. But C.S. Lewis wasn't. He was speaking about manhood, and he was talking about an erosion of that. Is that what you're referring to? Are you kind of saying, hey, it's 2020 now, that was 1930 or whenever he wrote that, and it is that, and you need to shake your head or something and get out of that place that where you're calling domestication?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the biggest difference is that where erosion is just a slip. It's like, hey, I stopped paying attention to this, and it just, that was the natural order of things, that it just went a little bit off. I think domestication is similar, but it's different in the fact that domestication is usually very intentional. And I think this has been more intentional as far as it's not easy to control feral Christians, and they don't fit real nicely into about, I keep going back to what you said because it was perfect. You don't want a feral dog around your nice neighborhood, because even though that dog is acting in an appropriate way for what that dog was made for, it doesn't fit well the more civilized you get. And I made it clear in the book, feral doesn't mean that you're destructive. It doesn't mean that you're purposefully going around hurting people. It just means that you are in a state where you're able to live out really natural, the way that a Christian should be able to live out their life. And I think with domestication, the biggest thing is that it's easier. If you look at animals, there's a reason why many animals have kind of allowed domestication to happen, because it's easier to make someone happy and just get fed and get taken care of than it is to really go out and be in the wild and have to make it happen and have to take care of yourself and all those things. And I think that that's where I think Christianity took a turn, and I don't know exactly when it was, where we just started saying, you know what, if we just play by the rules, if we just kind of stay inside these fences, we're going to be taken care of, and everything's going to be quite a bit easier. And rather than really going out and doing what the Bible says, which is going to make life a lot more difficult.
So we're gonna talk about what the Bible says to do in a second. But before I ask more about that. Intentional domestication. Whose intent? What are you referring to?
I think it's different. I think throughout history, it's been different. Whether you want to call it leaders or entities. I think anytime we see this happen quite a bit, whenever there's a movement that is based on something real, that's based on something that people are truly passionate about and really want to see happen, there's always going to be different entities that want to use that for themselves. And so if you look throughout the history of Christianity, really from the start, and you can go through all the political, kings even who have tried to use Christianity to say, hey, I like that Christianity is this movement that people really listen to because there's something real, but how can I use this for myself? And so you start to twist and just put a few rules on it and say, hey, I'm going to, I'll establish this as the religion of our country as long as you play by these rules, and we'll help each other out. And that's a step in that direction. And so I think throughout the history of Christianity, it has been this ongoing saga of people trying to use it for their own gains or just control of people. And that's not exclusive to Christianity. I think we see that throughout history of, if there's a movement, there's always some sort of entities who are trying to use it for themselves.
So was the domestication by the Christians, or was the domestication done by another force that is non-Christian? Like, did people that let me ask that more clearly. Do people the people that did this domestication that were intending it? Because you said intentional, and that mainly made me curious, because that means that implies some forethought to it, right? Were the people that engaged in this domestication process, were they so-called Christians, or were they non-Christians?
I think it's both. I think that even in a domestication process, it kind of takes both sides. And I think it was both sides seeing that mutual benefit, because that's what they say even, and I'm not an expert, but even when it goes back to wolves and dogs and things like that, is if both sides see that mutual benefit of, hey, I give up some freedom, but you provide some security. And it's been this teetering back and forth. And I think that it's always, and I say it at the book, it's always at first, you're not compromising much and you're not compromising anything really important. It's just as you keep going, you start to give up more and more of your freedom for the sake of that security and for the sake of the benefits that you're gaining from being domesticated and making yourself useful to somebody else versus just doing what you were made to do. And so I think it's both. And I think that there have been, like you said, even so-called Christians who got themselves in leadership who really weren't in it for the right reasons, but they saw, hey, this is a way that I get power. But I think there are also some really well-meaning leaders in the church who truly just thought, hey, this is a good thing. We both benefit as we try to play by rules and as we try to stay in our little, fences that people like. And so I think it's always going to be both.
I think that I think it cuts through every human's heart. Everybody's heart, that, because I mean, we look at things sometimes, we look at people in certain ways, but really life, if you're a Christian, is a constant battle against sin. And, in a way, you're tempted. There's different temptations. Sometimes there's the temptation to be a pastor because you love to feed your ego, right? I mean, or be a martyr because you want to be remembered for dying for your faith or whatever it is, right? And so that's a temptation too, in a sense, right? And so I think as Christians,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think as Christians, we have to be careful, about our own personal intents. It's hard to decide whether, King Louis XIV was the Sun King and was a Christian or not. I mean, it's hard to know, right? His life was probably pretty complicated. How Christians should act. Okay, so that's a really tough question to ask, actually. So, do you incorporate any politics into your ministry at all? Like, is there any sense that your congregation can be of both political parties in the United States, or is it predominantly one political party that attends your services and read your books?
That's a great question. I tend to be a non-political pastor, which some people hate, some people have a problem with. I think it's impossible to not be political at all because you're in it. I do pride myself. Our church does have people from different sides, but especially in the past months and past few weeks, even, really, that has become harder and harder and harder because things have gotten so divisive. But for me personally, I look in the Bible and I always just try to say, okay, what did Jesus do? What did the kind of first pastors do? Because I always try to go back to my roots and say, obviously it worked for them. They changed the world with no resources, no influence. So I try to go back and I look at the ministry of Jesus, and to say that his ministry didn't change anything political is impossible because, as he calls people to love sacrificially and to put their enemies on their prayer lists and to love their enemies and all those things. That's going to have a political ramification. But whenever someone tried to box Jesus in and say, hey, tell us something, tell us what we should do with the Romans and in our politics, he never seemed all that interested in trying to tell people how to do things politically, and even throughout the New Testament. So I try not to go that route. I try to teach people the Bible, tell them, look, you should vote, obviously, and vote what you think is right. But I feel absolutely no need to go up on a platform on Sunday and tell people politically what they need to do or don't do. My hope is that as they read the Bible, God's going to reveal exactly what they're supposed to do. And that's as political as I get, because I believe if the people of God live out our calling the way that we should, who's elected or not elected is not going to have nearly as big impact as the church actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
What's the experience of a non-believer with a feral Christian?
I would say refreshing. That has been my biggest takeaway, is actually, as I have gone all in on, and as I kind of said from the start, I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I can look in the mirror and say I am the model of a feral Christian. I think I'm trying to push past fences. I think I'm trying to listen to God and go take land that He's calling me to go take and possess. But what I found
is that literal? Literally?
I'm talking more spiritually. I mean, it could be physical, but if you look at the pattern in the Old Testament, it was very literal. It was very physical when it came to the Israelites. Go take land, go slaughter these people, things like that. As we move into the New Testament, that becomes inside of yourself, inside of your mind, and there's still some physical things, but a lot of that is metaphorical. So where the Israelites were called to go possess physical land, there's things that we're called to do, or even ways we're called to think and process our emotions and thoughts. And that's land that God's saying, I want you to go possess this land. But oftentimes in our minds, in our hearts, as well as physically, we are just fenced in. So as I have made that commitment to say, all right, God, if you're telling me to push past this fence, even though that scares me, and even though everyone else in my life tends to want me to stay behind this fence, I'll push past it if you're telling me to. I actually have found that makes Christians much more uncomfortable than non-Christians. And it's actually the non-believers who are much more open to what I'm saying than Christians are even. So it's been very interesting on that front, how open non-Christians have been to what I've been trying to say.
How does God communicate with you? Like you said that if God's telling you to do this, what I'm saying is that what is that experience of knowing or believing what God's will is in your life? What does that feel like? Tell me about that.
That's a great question, because I think it's different for everybody. And I don't think there's one great formula. And this is one of those things for a Christian that usually takes them a little while to get. For me personally, he usually speaks to me through a passion. I'm somebody that, given the opportunity, I'll be lazy. I like to relax. But there are things that all of a sudden I will just have this passion for, or this burning to say, hey, that's not right. I gotta do something. That is usually how God speaks to me, is through passion. And I have never had, an audible voice. Some people have, and I think that they're right, because God clearly does that. But for me, it's usually just as I'm thinking, as I'm letting myself play through some scenarios or ways of doing things, or things in my life that I'm trying to process. Do I like these things? Do I not? I'll just start to get thoughts that don't really sound like mine, that as I look in the Bible, I go, oh, that lines up with what God is saying. And so as I pray about that, I'll say, okay, is this you? And that'll usually get confirmed. But I think it's different for everybody. And I think that's one of those journeys that we all have to make, to say, how does God like to speak to me personally?
I find that, there's a couple different questions I can ask now, because that was a good answer. But I'm going to ask you this, and this is going to sound awkward maybe to you, or maybe you'll understand what I mean. How does Satan communicate with you then?
Oh, that's a great question, and that's not awkward at all. I think we all should, and I think So for me, in reading the Bible, Satan is not omnipresent. So God is kind of like God's talking to all of us. I don't think Satan can do that. I don't think he's got that same power. But I think in the spiritual realm, there are kind of demonic or just evil things that are vying for control of our thoughts. And if you look at the Bible, Satan is called the accuser. That's one of the things we know. This is what he does.
Mhm.
He accuses. This is so when your thoughts are thoughts of accusations,
Hmm.
that's not usually God. If you look in the Bible, God doesn't accuse, he leads and he gives you options. So if it's accusations, I try not to listen to it. And if it's fear. So the Bible tells us that perfect love drives out all fear. God speaks through love. But if it's this dread, punishment, like, that feeling when you were a kid and your parents were like gone and you broke something
Mhm.
and you're just waiting for them to come home. And man, when they come home, I'm going to get it. That feeling, love drives that out. And so those are the two feelings. If it's this dread, if it's this worry about how I'm going to be punished or I'm going to whatever, or if it's accusations, I usually find that's going to be the enemy talking, and that's not God.
Can I throw another one on the table for you? See what you think?
Absolutely.
I think that he also speaks through unwholesomeness. And I say that, what I mean by that when I say that is, those things that are deliciously wrong, like a beautiful woman, or like, that maybe you're thinking, man, whew, whew, that I think that's Satan speaking to you with that desire,
Absolutely.
where it feels so good. Just the temptation is so strong. Or, and it's just like you feel drawn to it, but it's wrong. It's that unwholesomeness. Like that's a signal that the devil's there, bud. I think too, for me. It's like,
Absolutely.
that desire to have something that is not good for you, that you absolutely know is not good for you.
Absolutely. And I would even tack on to that. The enemy is great at counterfeit. So
Mm.
what he does is there's something that God that has made that's good because it comes in a package that is good for you. So like
Mhm.
you had said, a beautiful woman, like marriage to a beautiful woman is a good thing because it comes in this whole package
Mhm.
that grows you and matures you and turns you into somebody better.
Mhm.
And the beautiful woman is part of it. But what the enemy tries to do is take that package and tell you, I can only take the good, easy parts out of it. I can offer that to you. So I can offer you this beautiful woman without responsibility or commitment or growth. It's just you get this part.
Mhm.
And it's always a lie. It's because whenever you walk into it, you realize, oh, this wasn't how it was represented to me to be. It's always different. But the enemy is so good. That's his biggest trick is, even when you look at, I've been getting into like eating and nutrition and
Sure.
stuff. And I watched this documentary where he said, like, if you give a child like 100 apples and just say, eat these apples until you can't eat them anymore, it's not going to hurt them because that apple has fiber. It's got the apple juice. It's this package that your body can just
Mhm.
process. But if you gave a child as much apple juice and say, just drink this apple juice,
Mm.
that child can really get unhealthy really fast because
Sure.
you've pulled the one thing out. And I think that's what the enemy is always trying to get us to do. And so I would agree completely with you. Whenever it's the thought of, hey, you don't need this whole package,
Mhm.
I can just take out the good part for you. That is always, to me, the enemy. And so unwholesomeness, I think that's a great word for it, is it's that I can have the good thing easy and I don't need to, get all the rest that's supposed to come with it.
Yeah. It's funny because it's interesting. I'm going to bring up a bit of a controversial topic here, but
Sure.
I think listening into your recent podcasts, uh, the one about the Black Lives Matter, where you brought up the element of listening. So there's, I didn't like the fact that you compared it to a marriage, but we'll talk about that in a second. Okay.
Sure.
This idea of white privilege. Okay. This is a term. Now here you have two white guys are going to talk about white privilege. Yay. That's great. But you know what? They can listen to us too. And listening goes both ways. Right. So here's my take on it. So if you look at American statistics, okay, now I'm Canadian, but generally America and Canada, you have very, very similar places to live. If you look at American statistics and you say, show me all the black people married to black people, because not all black people marry black people, not all white people marry white people. So show me only the marriages where black people are married to other black people. And then show me the marriages where white people married Caucasian to Caucasian, and then Asian and Asian. And then show me the average wealth statistics for their homes. Okay. So you see very, very minor statistical differences between the different racial groups. Very, very minor. Like statistically, maybe not relevant, like 2%, 1%, 3%, stuff like that. If you say, okay, now just show me the household incomes of all people by race. All of a sudden, the whites drop down 20% and the blacks drop down 80%. And so I think in what people, when they talk about white privilege, what they're talking about is marriage privilege. And when people get married and stay married, regardless as to whether or not they're a Christian, they're black, they're Asian, or they're white, they get ahead. And if they have they have children with the same woman, they tend to live in communities that are more affluent. And they tend to have higher household incomes, significantly higher household incomes. And this is true to the point where in Canada, if you take out mentally people that are suffering from mental illness or alcoholism or stuff like that, poverty doesn't exist for non-single family, single parent homes. Like poverty is a statistical function of the single parent home in Canada. Right? So I think while these movements are pointing to something, they're saying this is a problem. It seems like these people are living better than we're living. And they're right. That's happening. But I think the issue is not one of race, but rather of marriage. And by saying marriage, meaning that you're committing to living to a certain code, monogamy, perhaps, monogamy being in there, raising children together, having joint goals of like having a nice community where children can live in safe places because both the mother and the husband are there working together. They're better off. They have time to think about things like that. And they're able to make those kinds of choices. And regardless as to whether they're black, white, or Asian, they seem to do well when they pick that model to live by. And I think I don't know how you get that message out, but it's statistically true, Eric. Does your gut align with that?
Oh, for sure. And I think, you're totally right. Because in order to be married, I've been married, we just celebrated 10 years. And so in order to be married, there's a few things that are non-negotiable. You've got to work for something bigger than yourself. You've got to say no to your emotions. You've got to be able to say, hey, I feel this, but I choose to not act on it. There's a lot of things that marriage forces you to do that are just life goals. Now, if someone's listening and they've gotten a divorce, I'm not saying that I'm better than you or anything else. I know I look at my wife and I go, man, because we have stuck together, I am more capable of everything in my life. That's just who I am. And I think, with your question of how do we get that message out there that, hey, living an unselfish life, which is kind of what marriage forces you to do. You can't be selfish. That is your biggest ticket to really having a great life. To me, it goes back to even that podcast I did where it's just, it has to start with listening. I mean, the old adage is no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so for me, that was even, with just trying to encourage Christians, like just listen. Don't be afraid, because that's what I was feeling from all my Christian friends. It was like they wanted to cut off anyone who was supporting the Black Lives Matter. It was like they were afraid to let them talk. And it's like, I don't think that's a Christian thing. I don't, because like I said, we shouldn't be afraid. Perfect love casts out fear. So let them speak and try your best to go, let me understand it. I mean, like I said in the podcast, I grew up in rural Wisconsin where there was no diversity whatsoever. So this is all new to me. I have no real personal experience to draw from. So I just go, hey, I don't know if you're right or you're wrong, but like I can listen. I can try to understand what you're saying. And I think that as we do that, and especially where, and this is where I probably drew that line to marriage, is listening to actually listen, to understand, not to try to prove someone wrong. Not like, hey, I'm going to listen to you, but the whole time I'm just getting my argument ready, because that never builds bridges. That never builds. So it's like, hey, I'm just going to listen. I'm going to try to understand where you're coming from. And I think the more that we do that, the more people are going to allow us then to speak, and they're going to actually care what we have to say.
What does a feral Christian then? How do you approach someone? So Black Lives Matter is I would say an atheistic organization. I don't know if that's declared publicly. I'm certain, Scott, if you want to find that out. But I would say that likely they, just by the listening, reading some of their goals and mandates, and very powerful organization actually. And in some ways also very intimidating. Now there doesn't seem to be there seems to be something different between the groups that are rioting and the people that are peacefully protesting. There seems to be like a difference, or it's presented that way, but it's unclear. So I'm not going to say that the Antifa crowd is Black Lives Matter, but I'm going to say that they're very intent on their purposes, and they want to see serious change, fundamental change, institutional change, acknowledgement of a lot of tough stuff that would be very difficult for Christians to swallow societally. So how do you engage, like the idea that the nuclear family is non-important? Like that's a tough pill to even like if you listen to it. I understand they want community parenting, but that's a tough one, man. I'm not. That's definitely an untried model for large, multi-ethnic, diverse democracies in the world to try out. With millions and millions of people. How do you there's a listening phase and then there's a response phase. Like how would a feral Christian respond to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's where I think most people, most of the Christians that I know, if you ask them, hey, do Black people matter? They're going to be like, yes. But the biggest, I think, tension is exactly what you're talking about, is a lot of Christians know, hey, there's someone at the top of this that, I at least have some real concerns about. And so what we often will do is, even like our neighbor down the street, when they say, hey, Black Lives Matter, we're like, we want to shut it down because we fear that. For me, I view it very differently, because I've seen what happens. So if somebody, let's say our neighbor, because that's usually who we're going to talk to. We're not going to talk to any leaders of the organizations. We're going to talk to the guy down the street who's saying, hey, Black Lives Matter. Is the more we try to shut them down and say, hey, don't say that, you're not allowed to, the further we drive them in. And so if we are willing to be like, okay, well tell me why, what you're seeing, what you're feeling. And we take the parts where they're like, well, hey, there's some issues here and there. And we validate them and say, hey, you're right, we should do something. Now what we have allowed for them is that if this organization starts to come up with some questionable things that they're pushing out, that person has gone, okay, I don't like that. And there's these people over here that are Christians who at least were willing to listen to this important stuff. So maybe I can move into this realm because they at least will listen to what's important, versus if we are like, nope, shut up, don't talk about it. Even as that other organization might get more pronounced in some not so good things, that person feels stuck there. Well, I got to keep supporting it because no one else will listen. Does that make sense?
I understand. I think that we fundamentally disagree on that, and that's okay. I
Yeah.
think that I don't think you're actually listening to what they're saying. I think that's what I think. There you go. Because I don't mean to put it out there. That kind of didn't come out the right way, but to me, it doesn't seem like. And this is from my perspective on that, is that they're politely talking about any issues. To me, it seems like more they're asking people to kneel and put fists in the air in restaurants. And, I'm not talking about the rioters. I'm talking about the protesters going around these towns and engaging people on the street and asking them, telling them that they must acquiesce. I'm very uncomfortable with that. So I don't see the listening. I see coercion from that organization. And I'm Canadian, so is prevalent up here? Yeah, these organizations are in Canada as well. Have I encountered it yet myself? No, because I avoid those places where they might be. So yeah, I mean that's difficult for people. And I'm not sure that listening is the right strategy. That's all. And I wonder if maybe you agree with that. Maybe we're past the
Sure.
listening stage.
It could be. And I think, like you said, it depends. And as you said as well, even if we completely disagree, that's okay as well. But I think it depends on who it is that you are seeing and meeting up with. So in my experience, kind of my neck of the woods, most of what is happening on social media. It's people saying, hey, I support this, and other people yelling at them and them getting into arguments versus, saying, even as a Christian being like, hey, tell me why you support them and stuff like that. I would agree. If I was walking down the street and someone said, hey, I'm telling you, you have to do X, Y, or Z or whatever, that's a very different conversation. And like you said, there are probably people in America or wherever that are having to deal with that. So I do think at that point, going back to as a feral Christian, one of the biggest definitions is you're listening to God. So I think that's where you got to really go read your Bible, try to ask, some mentors, where can I look? Where in the Bible have they dealt with situations somewhat similar to this that I can dive into and pray about? And for me, even if people did that, that's all a feral Christian does, is they actually listen to God and they say, okay, what are you telling me to do in this situation? Because it might change a month from now. It might mean something different because something shifts. So I agree. I'm not saying listening is the one size fit all no matter what. But I think it's a good place to start. And maybe we are past that already. But I know, at least in my neck of the woods and what I'm seeing, I still think it can have an impact.
I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question, and
Okay.
it's a tough one. And maybe we can answer it together. You go out for dinner with your wife, okay? And you're sitting on a patio, and a group of people walk up to you, and they start demanding that you raise your fist in the air. And the situation is definitely hostile. Like nobody's getting hurt, but you don't know what's going to happen if you don't comply. Do you think God would ever tell you to put your fist in the air? You think that's like a possible thing God could tell you to do? Like, join this force now because it's just too scary to stand up. You think God would ever tell you to be a coward? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I do. I'm trying to think, he definitely wouldn't tell you to do it because of fear. He wouldn't be like, hey, I'm calling you to be a coward right now. The only way that I could see it, and I guess off the top of my head, I don't even know if this is, I'm just trying to think of the character of God and the pattern of what I've seen through the life of Jesus and what he constantly shows, is the only way would be if it was purposefully to build a bridge with somebody, or purposefully to make it about something bigger. So, the only thing I could see, and this might be a terrible illustration, but it's off the top of my head. I go back to when the Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus, and they're like, "Hey, should we pay our taxes?" And Jesus, basically said, "Yes, pay your taxes." But it was more of a, "Hey, I'm talking about something important, and this is just a distraction, and I've got something bigger. So whatever, I'm not even going to worry about this. I'm not going to die on this hill right now." And so that would be the only way that I would see it, is if there's a bigger thing going on. And God was like, "For right now, this isn't what's important. You're supposed to say something to this guy. There's a bridge that's supposed to be made right now. And that's the important thing." But I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, God's not going to ask you to sin. So the question is whether you would process that as, for sure, every single time that's a sinful thing to do.
I know it's a tough one, isn't it?
It is.
Like there's a couple, and I think about it because, I'm not in that situation. That would make me very uncomfortable. If someone told me to do that, like I'm probably 90% I'm going to say no. Like,
right.
And I'm going to accept whatever consequences they're going to bring.
Right.
But there's a part of me that also says, you know what? I have this friend of mine who's super cool. And what would this guy do? And you know what he'd probably do? He'd probably go, "Yeah, all right, man. Yeah. And he'd say, "Get the hell out of here as fast as I can."
Right.
You understand what I mean? Get away from these people.
Oh, yeah.
This is a mob, But I don't think there's is there a time, what would Christ do in that situation? That's a relevant question right now in the world. What would Christ do when approached by Black Lives Matter? How would he behave? Isn't that, that's a fascinating question.
Well, what he would probably do, and I think it's a great question, is he would somehow make it about something more important. That's what Jesus always did. It's amazing when you read of his life. People were always trying to trap him. So the funny thing is that situation wouldn't have even been out of the ordinary for Jesus, because people were constantly trying to, ask him a question that they knew there was no right answer to. And just to see, how is he going to answer this? How is he? And so he'd probably be pretty comfortable in that situation, because that was like his whole ministry on the earth. But what he always somehow did is found a way to make it about the kingdom of God. To be like, "Hey, I know what you guys are trying to do, but I'm flipping this to something that actually is like a kingdom related thing." So he would find a way to connect with those people and to ask them about, their relationship with God, their eternal soul, and he would somehow disarm them. And I just wish I had the skill set that he had to do it. Because that's what I would try to do. If I was being honest, I don't think I would just be like, "Oh, I don't want to get hurt. Let me do this. Let me raise my fist." But I would probably be thinking how do I make this about something beneficial? How can I connect with these guys and actually try to pour something good into this situation? And I probably wouldn't do it well. And it would probably end up going badly. But I would probably try.
There's one problem with that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm going to say this in jest, but I'm laughing about it. But there's one problem with all that. And I agree with you. There's one problem. A mob nailed that guy to the cross eventually, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And that might very well happen. And that's part of being a feral Christian as well. That you have to understand, earthly ease is not the end goal for a feral Christian. Accuracy to what the Bible says, and also understanding the Bible says that you're going to go through trials and you're going to go through suffering and people are going to hate you and all of those things are going to happen. So I would do it knowing that very well might be the end goal. But I believe it's the Apostle Paul that talks about trying your best to obey authority and things like that, because he basically says make it so that if you get punished, if you get beat up, if you get left for dead, which happened to Paul quite often, it was because of something good that you did. And there's not even a question of, well, I got beat up, but I'm not sure if it was because I was pointing people to God or if I was just being dumb and said something I shouldn't have said, or, broke this rule that I really shouldn't have. So for me, in that situation, if I know, like, look, they're beating me up or whatever simply because of my relationship with Jesus and that I was pointing them to that, I'd be okay with that. I just wouldn't want it to be like, hey, I was just stubborn and that's why they were beating me up. So that would give me a little bit more comfort, I guess, in that.
It's a tough call, man. We live in strange times, man, and people are looking to, I'm asking you because I listened to your podcast about you basically compared marriage, like the idea of the complexity of a marriage within a marriage in terms of listening and trying to understand the other person's perspective deeply. And that can be, people don't understand, like that's extremely difficult to do. In fact, it may actually get harder the longer you're married. Like you have to get better and better and better at it. But it's the same, but what they're doing is very difficult because nobody speaks on behalf of Caucasian people or white people. Like there's no group of people that's like there to listen. And the idea that it's homogeneous or however you pronounce that word, like white people are extremely diverse. There's lots of different kinds of white people, actually. We have our own problems amongst ourselves, and it's a very diverse group, white people. And, some of them are descended from slave owners. Some of them are descended from colonists. Others aren't. And you can't tell the difference by looking at them. And so, but nobody speaks on behalf of white people because it's ridiculous to even consider that. Oh, that's a leader in the white community. Like what are you talking about, buddy? Like that's one of the most ridiculous things you could say right now. So he's a leader in the white community. Right? Like it almost makes you seem like an idiot when you talk like that.
Yes.
So,
and I think that's. Oh, go ahead.
No. You if you got a point, go run with it.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the end goal should not be of, hey, we want this race to be here. The Bible is really clear. There's no longer Jew or Greek. Like we're all on the same page.
Sure.
And so for me, even when I tell people, listen, just listen, because from that person's perspective, they have been discriminated because of their skin color. So like in their opinion, they didn't want it to be about skin color. And again, that's the people I've talked to. Like I've said, you get higher up and things change. But for me, I'm always, who am I actually talking to? Because I just want to build those bridges. Mm-hmm. And that's mostly because I feel like if those people get asked to do worse and worse things, I feel like they need to know that they have a bridge to leave that. Like to leave that organization if they feel like they need to. And so that's why it's just, listen, I don't even necessarily have to say you're right, but I'm going to take the time to try to listen.
Well, the problem is that it seems like there's a lot of pressure to agree with someone right in the moment. That's another thing. Like there's a time for reflection. Like when you have a good debate, like starting this podcast, the Life Show, has been so great for my personal development because I've been able to speak with so many smart people. And quite frankly, Eric, I challenge them. I ask them tough questions, and I just get into with people and it makes people uncomfortable. Maybe I'm a feral Christian too. I want to know. But, one of the thing about the marriage though, these relationships between peoples are very complex as well. Just like in a marriage. And people say, oh, what do you mean? No, man. Like when you're married to someone else and you have kids with them and then life starts to happen and, all manner of things go on. And you have to understand what the other person's going through and really try on the micro level with this one person to, be there for them, even though maybe you're mad at them. You have to fight all kinds of emotions in a marriage. It actually, the marriage might actually be more complicated than the other one. But my point is this. Generally, what I've learned from listening to the Black Lives Matter movement, watching, knowing the difference between an Antifa terrorist and someone that's, saying, hey, we want to stop shooting black people with cops. Like, don't shoot so many people. That's probably a good idea. I mean, like, everybody cringes. Why'd you shoot him 7 times? Like, it's like, what, like 7 times? I mean, there's times when you're just like, what are you doing? But, what I've learned is that I think there is injustice in the world. And I think our society has come to a point where, everyone's got a lot of consumer goods, right? Everyone has a lot of stuff, from China that comes from cheap manufacturing in China. We have a lot of things, we certainly have all manner of technology that, makes us like Greek gods. We fly across the world. I'm looking at a hologram of you. We're talking in real time. Like, it's pretty crazy. But I think people feel a sense of injustice, Eric. And I don't think black people are alone in that. I think a lot of white people, if they had a leader, would stand up and say, hey, we agree with you, but we don't think it's on racial lines, actually. There's a lot of injustice in the world that could be fixed. And I don't think it's a race issue. I know there's a lot of miserable white people out there that are poor and having a shit life. Lots, probably like an overall count, probably more than there is black people in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think everybody has their cross, and it looks different. And you look at, even if you look at, someone who is born with a huge trust fund, life is always life. Like life is always going to have its good and its bad. And no matter what, it's going to feel like life. Like, as long as, again, you look at the most horrific situations and okay, like that's different. I think, how I view it as is, it's kind of like, if we're talking about like marriage, have you ever read the book Love and Respect?
No. I'll write it down.
Yeah, it's a great book. Basically, it talks about how, like, when you're married, like, each of you needs something inherently from your partner, and it like fills you up. It gives you energy. It wants you to keep going. And in a marriage, it's easy to get on this thing called the crazy cycle, is what the book talks about, where one person says, you're not giving me what I want, so I'm not going to give you what you want. And the other person says, well, then I'm not giving you. And you're just drying each other out, and you're just killing each other. And he's like, it takes one person to say, look, even if you don't give me what I want, I'm gonna give. And he's like, that's all it takes is for things to start getting back on track. And so even though I can definitely say for a lot of us, we can look at our life and say, hey, there's injustices happening. But I always want to be the person to say, like, I'll try to help someone else's, even if mine aren't being helped right now. And I know that that's a hard thing to look at, and it's not natural. And I know also, when I look at my life, there's a lot less injustices than even in other white people's. God has blessed me so much. And so that's how I try to look at it, is not to say there's no other injustices, but hey, I'll worry about this one right now, and then just trust that mine will be taken care of. And that's a really hard thing to do. But as a Christian, God does kind of say that, like, look, worry about other things and let me worry about you. And so that's how I look at it, but I know not everyone will be able to look at it that way.
Yeah, it's a tough time we live in. It's
Absolutely.
a tough time, man. There's a lot of, it's going to be interesting leading up to this presidential election in the United States. Let me, maybe you can close with a couple thoughts on, if you're converting somebody. Let's say you're in the conversion moment. I don't know what it is in your church, but the whatever that sacrament is, whatever the moment of truth is, the letting Jesus into your heart, the slain in the spirit, whatever it is, there's lots of different ceremonies in these different Christian churches of how you become a Christian. What do you promise to the feral Christian? What is your promise to them? What are they going to get?
I love that question. I'm even going to take a second because I want to do that question justice. I promise them very little. I promise them a restored relationship to the one who created them. That's ultimately, we have a gospel of peace. That's what the Bible says. We have a gospel of peace. And peace doesn't mean calm. When you look at the biblical word peace, it's a unifying together of something that's been broken. It's reunifying something that's meant to be together that's been torn apart. And if you look at the Bible, we were created by God to be in a relationship with him. Adam and Eve had this close relationship with God. And Jesus basically said, I came to give you the opportunity to be reunited with God, to bring you back together. And so I promised them a lot of trials, a lot of difficulties, a cross. Jesus himself said, look, you got to count the cost. You got to figure out what it is. But at the end of the day, we were all made to be in a relationship with God. That's what I believe the Bible says, and I felt it in my life. I was created to be loved by God and to love God. And I try not to make converts, because actually Jesus said the Pharisees tried to make converts. I make disciples. So I think it's much more of a process. And I don't know if I can say I know exact in each person's life, this is the moment where, if you were to die, you'd go to heaven, because I let God deal with that. But I just try to bring people closer. That's all I try to do. How can I bring you closer to God? How can I help you take the next step? Some people are 1,000 miles away. Some people are closer to God than I am, or whatever. And so that's all I promise them is, look, we're going to chase after a true relationship with the God that we were made to have a relationship with.
It's interesting. There's two responses. I'm gonna say that I'm gonna go with the first one here. So I've met a lot of individuals that are not pastors or preachers. They don't speak from pulpits. They don't write books. They don't record podcasts. When you speak and talk with them, you can really feel the presence of the Lord in them. And people should be on the lookout for those people. They're actually really cool to meet and to talk to. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they don't want to talk. But if you have the honor to get to know someone like that, you find that there's usually something to know from them. It's like one of those, when the student is ready, the teacher appears moments of your life, right? What I liked about what you said there, Eric, is a restored relationship with the one who created them. I thought that was beautiful, man. Huh.
Thank you. I wish we talked about it more. Jesus talked about it all the time. I mean, when he was on earth, he wouldn't shut up about it. He was like, this is why I came. This is my purpose. And even while he was still alive, he was trying to give people, Jesus himself said, look, I don't do anything that God, the Father, doesn't tell me to do. He's constantly in this communication, and he's one with God. And if there's anyone listening and you're far away from God, maybe you left the church. I've left the church when I was 17. I was sick of it. I thought it was all hypocritical or whatever. I just want to say that there is a way to have that restored relationship. There's a path there. It's what God wants. And when you actually can become one with God again, it is the most amazing thing on the face of the planet. And that's what we should be striving towards. That's the reason why we go through the trials and we make the hard decisions and all of those things, is because we simply want to be closer to the one we were made to be close to. And I just wish that we as the church did a better job of really explaining that to people, that that's the goal. That's why we do what we do, is to be close to our Father.
You know what popped into my head? You ever hear like the people talk about how the world's a simulation? Hear about that? Right? The world's a simulation. We're in a simulation. I think it's funny when people talk about that. Like, but if you were like to then cut off their arm and say, is it still a simulation? Or is that real? Well, that's real. My arm's bleeding. I'm dying or whatever, right? I think so. I think that this simulation thing is kind of like silly intellectual people that aren't in pain right now, in physical pain, kind of, that's, you know what I mean? It's a simulation. I think, and if I'm, I'm not a pastor, but man, everybody's screwed up in life, dude. Everybody's done things, especially in America, that are like in Canada in 2020 that are total abominations. But Christ can forgive you for those things, man. And that's the truth. You can get out of that. You can get out of that hole, man. There's a way. And another good, I was interesting. I had the opportunity to read the big book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book. Oh my goodness. That is like, people, like, it's almost like a second Bible, man. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm not an alcoholic, but I've seen it happen. So I opened it up and read a couple chapters, and it's all about that, man. It's all about knowing that that's why Christ came and he's your savior, and that's, you can get past that negativity. You have to apologize. You have to make right as you go on this path. But if you pursue the Christian living, the message of Christ, restoring your relationship with your creator, you can get yourself out of a lot of messes.
Yeah. And you don't even have to get yourself out of it. That's the beautiful thing is I always go back to the story of the prodigal son. It's my favorite story in the Bible because that's who I was. I grew up in the church. I knew everything. I ran away and I literally found myself sitting in a mud hole in manure, metaphorically, just like that. And it literally says, he came to his senses and his only job was to return to his father. Everything else was done by the father. The father not only accepted him back, he was so overjoyed. And that's the other thing that I just like, God's just waiting. Like, he's not like, oh, I can't wait till he comes back so I can put him in his place. And he's waiting, like he's going to run and meet you halfway. And again, this is the God that, like you said, you're going to have to ask for forgiveness, and you're going to have to give up and surrender some of your unhealthy things and all that. But it's because he has something so much better for you. It's always, he wants to bring you into this place of amazing, and not necessarily physical blessings that your life's going to be easy, but this place of oneness. And it's just hard to explain the peace that you can have when you are one with the person that you were made to be one with. It's hard to describe, but it's on the table for all of us. And like you said, doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter. You don't even have to get yourself out of the pit. You just gotta look back and ask. And that's why I love what I get to do. And that's why with being a feral Christian, I get passionate whenever we make Christianity out to be something it's not. Because what it is perfect and beautiful. And we just have not done a good job of defining it for people.
So true. But you brought up the prodigal son. I thought that would have been a perfect place to end it, Eric. But the prodigal son is very close to my heart. And I think that, while we're all the prodigal at one time in our life, and our goal is to be the benevolent father, right? We all want to be the benevolent father if we can, right? Just gives his son you want your inheritance, son? Sure. That's what you want? All right, bud. There you go, man. Get after it. That's what you want to do? Gives him his inheritance. Kid goes and spends it. Kid comes back. Oh my God, he's back. He made it back. How are you? A big hug, throw a party, put the ring on, slaughter the goat, right? Let's do it. Slaughter the fattened calf, right? Throw a party. My son has returned. And there's the envious brother. The envious brother, right? You never even gave me a goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Right?
Yeah.
Those are the three states of life. You're kind of you're either getting totally screwed up, you're totally envious, or you're the benevolent father. And I think I think the benevolent father seems like such a cool dude.
Yeah. Well, and because of the kindness, and that's where I think like kindness has gotten lost.
Yeah.
Because kindness, what kindness is when you have the upper hand. So like in life, you're constantly shifting between, I have the upper hand in this situation. Oh, I don't. I'm relying on somebody else. And you're constantly, and what kindness is when I've got the upper hand, I'm going to be good to people. And that's what the Father was, is it was like when the Son came back, the Father had all the power. He had all, and it was like, no, I'm going to be good when I have the upper hand. And what I love is even to the older brother who, like you said, was just being so dumb. And it's like, you would think, oh, this father's going to, but even to him, he showed kindness. And he was like, look, let me explain this to you. And I think you're right. Like there's such a, I think we look at people, and it's the reason why, you know, in every action movie, they show the scene of the guy walking away from an explosion and not looking back. And why that's so cool is there's a confidence to that. And there's the ability to be like, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. And to me, that's what kindness shows. It's like, I don't have to prove anything. I can just walk and I'm just going to do good. Like that's, and I don't have anything else to prove. I'm going to do good because that's what I want to do. And whatever that looks like. And that's definitely how I want to be. And I don't know if I'm there yet. I think I waffle in between the three. Like you said, we kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, it's a tight road, but it gets tighter and tighter. Eric, you know, I really appreciated you coming on and talking with me here, man. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for having me. These are the conversations I live for. This is just, even if it's difficult, it's real. And that was what Jesus did. And that's all I try to do. So I hope you enjoyed it too, but I definitely had a blast talking.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. It was great. Folks, if you enjoyed that and you're driving home right now or whatever it is you're doing, you're thinking, I should start a podcast, you know where you go? You go to getagripstudios.com. That's right, fully virtual. You know, eventually we're going to be open here in Toronto. This COVID thing's going to end at some point. Come on in here to the studio and you can record with your friends, whatever you want to do. Go to getagripstudios.com. Thanks for listening.